Well, it happened. Yesterday, we learned the news that I don't think is going to be shocking to anybody when you consider the dollar amount, but Jordan Montgomery exercised his $22.5 million player option for 2025 after having a very bad first season here in Arizona. And when the Diamondbacks signed him to that deal late into spring training, I think the idea from both sides was, hey, you wanted a long-term deal this offseason. You didn't get the long-term deal this offseason. We'll give you a nice one-year pillow contract so that if you go out there and you do exactly what you did last year, that you're going to be able to go back into the market and potentially have more suitors, and the market might open up for you, and you might be able to get that deal that you seek. And in order to entice you to come to Arizona, we'll also add in this player option to where maybe if things don't go as well and you're not so sure that you're going to be able to beat that number on the open market, you can opt back in. Well, I think when the Diamondbacks put that deal together, when they presented that to Jordan Montgomery, I think they were thinking one of two things. One, that Jordan Montgomery would pitch like he did in 2023, and there would be no questions about it, that he'd be opting out of the $22.5 million for 2025. Or option number two being that he pitches well enough to want to opt back in, but not well enough to be able to exceed that in a long-term deal. To where the Diamondbacks would be like, great, we've got you back for $22.5 million. You're a good pitcher, not necessarily a great pitcher, but we've got a nice rotational piece that can be in the middle of our rotation, eat up some innings for us at $22.5 million. That's great. We pitched 117 innings last year, pitched to a 6.23 ERA, and was removed from the rotation after 21 starts. So this was the worst case scenario for the Arizona Diamondbacks, because certainly not going to leave that money on the table. Not going to leave $22.5 million, because he's certainly not going to get that from another team coming off of that season being another year older. That was the knock on him in the first place, was that he was an older starting pitcher and nobody wanted to commit to the length that Jordan Montgomery and Scott Boras were looking for. So that's how he ended up taking this short-term pillow contract from the Arizona Diamondbacks. And then he goes out there and pitches as poorly. And listen, all these guys are members of the union. He would be doing his other players a disservice by not taking the player option. I know there are a lot of people out there that say, man, he's not worth the 22.5. How could he, after having a 6.23 ERA, exercise that player option? The union and its members would lose their mind if he declined this option, because, morally he can't take the $22.5 million because he didn't pitch up to those standards. No, that's not how it works. The Diamondbacks agreed to the deal. Jordan Montgomery's going to take his $22.5 million. So that's one wrinkle to all of this. And then there's the other wrinkle to this of owner Ken Kendrick during the post-op of the 2024 Diamondback season, going on radio here in town and putting all of the blame for the contract, for the decision to bring in Jordan Montgomery, on himself, completely providing cover for the front office. It is rare to see an owner, high-level executive, provide that type of cover to a GM, president of baseball ops, to provide that level of cover that, listen, don't blame the GM. I brought this to their attention. I was the one who greenlit the money. Do not blame them, blame me. If there's anybody that you want to blame, I believe was the quote, I'm paraphrasing. If there's anybody that you want to blame for Jordan Montgomery being on the 2024 Diamondbacks, you're looking at him. Ken Kendrick, it's me, my fault. And then completely blasted the player in the process. Now, was the idea to maybe make it so untenuous that Jordan Montgomery didn't want to come back? Was going to decline the option? Again, $22.5 million. That was never getting turned down. So if that's what the attempt was, it was never going to work. I appreciate the cover that was provided to the general manager, the owner taking the responsibility for a move like that. That was nice to see. But if the idea was to get him to opt out of the contract, that was never going to happen. Jordan Montgomery was never going to leave $22.5 million on the table for 2025. Was never going to happen. So here we are. What do we do? What do you do if you're the Arizona Diamondbacks? What do you do if you're Jordan Montgomery? You know the team doesn't want you. The owners basically said as much, but you had to take the money. So what is the logical solution here? And this is a really tough puzzle to figure out. This is a really tough situation to find, I think, a happy resolution for both sides. Because the trade value for Jordan Montgomery is about as low as it can get. 6.23 ERA, was removed from the rotation. And not just removed from the rotation for a team that was maybe spiraling out of control and they weren't playing well. This team was in a playoff spot until the last day of the season. If the Mets win the second game of the doubleheader against the Braves, the Diamondbacks are going to the playoffs. So this wasn't a team that completely was off the rails in 2024, and Jordan Montgomery was a part of that. Everything around Jordan Montgomery was good enough for this team to be a playoff team. Yet he pitched to a 6.23 ERA over 117 innings and got bumped from the rotation after 21 starts. So the trade value can't get any lower. Rock bottom trade value for Jordan Montgomery and the Arizona Diamondbacks. So if you are going to move him, if you are going to find a suitor, I think there's two paths to trading Jordan Montgomery off of this roster. Path A is you're going to have to hold on to some, if not a large portion of the money in order to move him. Like you're going to have to retain half the money, because I wonder if a team at, let's say, $12 million or $13 million thinks that Jordan Montgomery is a nice fourth or fifth option in your starting rotation. And at $12 or $13 million, you are willing to take a flyer on Jordan Montgomery to put him at the back of your rotation to eat up some innings at $12 or $13 million. Maybe you're more open to that. Or option B, plan B, path B is you swap bad contract for bad contract with another team that has a player in a similar situation to Jordan Montgomery, that they want to get out from the money, you want to get out from the money, and the money is kind of evened out, and the player that you're acquiring helps you a little bit, and Jordan Montgomery helps them a little bit, and so you're still keeping the money on the books, but maybe a change of scenery would be good for Jordan Montgomery. Maybe a change of scenery would be good for the player in question, and you swap bad contract for bad contract. But there is going to be at least 50% of Jordan Montgomery's money on the books for the Arizona Diamondbacks in 2025. Whether it's got his name next to it or another name next to it, at least half of this contract is going to sit against the money that Mike Hazen and company have available to them this offseason. I don't see a scenario where there's going to be a team that's going to call up Mike Hazen, or Mike Hazen's going to call them up and, oh, you know what? 6.23 ERA, 30-plus-year-old starting pitcher, got kicked from the rotation for a team trying to compete for the playoffs. You know what? We'll take that problem off your hands. $22.5 million? Sure, bring it on over. Unless you're attaching a major prospect to Jordan Montgomery. That's not going to happen. And maybe the Diamondbacks try to do that. They attach a prospect that teams are interested in. We've seen teams do this in the past, where they will attach a prospect to clear themselves of the money, but just seems very likely. So that's the scenario where Jordan Montgomery isn't on the Diamondbacks in 2025. But I think there's a decent chance he is on the Diamondbacks in 2025. So what does that scenario look like? Well, I could sit up here and I could spin it as he's going to get a full offseason with the team. He's going to get a full spring training with the team. He is not going to have to very quickly ramp up with a couple of minor league starts before being thrusted into the rotation like he was last year because he signed so late. He's going to have a full offseason to not worry about contract negotiations. He's not going to have a full offseason to worry about where he's playing, where he's moving his family. He's not going to have to worry about any of that. He's going to be able to look back at this season, see what went wrong, see what was a positive in his starts, and try to craft an offseason plan that can get him back to being the Jordan Montgomery of 2023, which is a solid middle of the rotation starting pitcher. Is that a potential outcome for the Arizona Diamondbacks next season? Absolutely. I could very easily see that because he gets a full offseason, because the stress of being a free agent is removed, because he's going to be able to just work in a lab, in the pitching lab, he can go to Driveline, he can go to all these different places to try to get better for 2024 or 2025, and then have a full spring training. We'll show up when pitchers and catchers report in February. will get all of spring training to ramp up the way that starting pitchers are supposed to ramp up. Blake Snell had this same problem in San Francisco. Signed late, another Scott Boras client, signed late and struggled through the first half of the year. Got sent down, was injured. I mean, not the ideal start for guys who sign these types of contracts. And so I can spin it to where a full spring training, we see a better version of Jordan Montgomery. Is it going to be to match the salary of $22.5 million? No, I don't think so. But it could be more serviceable. It could be somebody you're not replacing from the rotation after 21 starts. And so I do think there is a path back for Jordan Montgomery in 2025. Do I think the Diamondbacks will explore moving on from him? Absolutely. But do I think he will be back next season? I think it's the betting favorite right now. I think it's 60-40, 70-30 that Jordan Montgomery is on this team next season. So it shouldn't be a surprise that he accepted the option. It shouldn't be a surprise that he's going to take the paycheck for $22.5 million. Now the question is, which path do the Diamondbacks choose to take?